Welcome to another episode of Dentalflix Uncut. I am your co-host, Allison Lacusier, with Dr. Anissa Holmes, where we are introducing and interviewing an incredible guest today, Kelley. Welcome to Dentalflix Uncut.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
We can't wait to learn more about you and dive into how you're helping the industry. So, why don't you kick us off with your introduction and how you're helping our industry today?
Sure. Well, I'm Kelley. I am the CEO of Clinical HR, and I've been working with dental practices for about 12 years now, I think, which makes me sound incredibly old when I say that, but it has actually been 12 years now. I'm an HR advisor for dentists. I work with a lot of practice leaders, helping them with their employee relations, with their policy development, with total compensation, answering their questions. I don't do third-party outsourced services, so I'm not running payrolls or doing recruiting, but I'm really helping on that leadership side to keep them compliant and to build practices worth working for.
So, can we learn a little bit more, because it's uncut, a little bit more about your story, right? Like what led you to actually take this up as like a profession or something that you're committed to spending, so much time with helping people?
Serendipity and adaptability. I was actually in a completely different profession when I first started, way back in the day. My first business, I was a clinical massage therapist, and I ran my own practice for about 5 or so years. And then I decided at some point I wanted to go back to school and do something else. I thought I was going to do marketing. So I went for a marketing degree and took an HR class as a general business credit and fell in love with it and switched my major. And about my last year or so before I finished my degree, I said, okay, I'm self-employed. This was back in like 2012, where we didn't just hire the first person who showed up on time and sober. So I said, we probably need to go work somewhere doing something so that I can get hired when I finish my degree and go work in a Fortune 500 company in an HR department and work my way up a corporate ladder. And yeah, none of that happened. The place that I went to go work actually ended up being a dental CPA firm, of all things doing marketing. And I said, let's just go stay here for a year, 2 years, something like that, just to have something on my resume. But because I was doing marketing, my former boss invited me into some client meetings. He wanted me to learn the business and, learn more about what he did so that I could do better at what I was supposed to be doing. And then it all kind of evolved from there. Clients would ask questions that he couldn't answer because they weren't financial questions, they were HR questions. So I answered them because I can't keep my mouth shut. And ended up over like 7 years building myself into a role of an HR and business development consultant for the clients, as well as doing HR for the firm as we grew, as well as still doing marketing somehow, and everything from moving furniture in 4-inch heels to occasionally fixing the plumbing. Had a very long job description there. But I really, really loved the HR side of things. And so we had actually done a speaking engagement back in 2019 with TAGD for their business track. And that was really my first paid speaking engagement, where I kind of decided, oh, this is kind of fun too. Maybe we do this. Later on that year, we were kind of looking at putting that online. This is before pandemic, so this is before everybody got burnt out of online learning. Which has really, I think, gotten better, honestly, since then. I know we all got tired of Zoom meetings for a while, but now we've got all this on-demand CE, and we're like, oh, wait, that is actually kind of convenient. So maybe this is a good thing. But at that time, we were looking at building this online course, and my boss was, hey, you can put some of your HR stuff on it. Like, well, I could, but nobody really goes to a CPA firm to learn about HR. So if I did that, I'd really want to do it under my own branding, my own company, my own thing. And he said, sure, sounds fine. Great. So I went and started Clinical HR, fully intending it to be more of an education speaking type of firm. And then about the end of February 2020, I separated from the CPA firm, and 3 weeks later we had a pandemic. So I did a complete 360 back to being an HR consultant again. So now I get to do both. I get the best of both worlds. I get to travel and speak and educate practices and work with practice leaders and do what I love, and still do the consulting side.
It's not easy to be funny off the cuff. Like most people can't do that. And it's a sign of like high intelligence. And so I just want to acknowledge you for that. Like I'm over here like giggling at your like at all of your like quick-witted comments. So I'm just appreciating that. And I'm sure your clients appreciate working with you on that too. But
When you work in compliance, you have to do something to keep it fun.
yeah. I mean, and I think that's important. Like when you work with somebody that you do not want to get on a call with, but you know you have to, that's tough. And so I can imagine your clients really enjoy working with you on something that personally, I believe that HR is sexy. I really do. I think it's so important. I
I
think it's like one of those things that like we don't know how much we need it until we really need it. And that's usually when we're doing it wrong. And so can you share with us a little bit about like what are some of the things, like when we're thinking about HR in a dental practice, like what are some of the things that you really help and support practices do, or some of the problems that you solve, or more importantly, and better yet, avoid?
Sure, but before I do that, I'll actually add to what you said. Not only is, by the way, I do agree, it's definitely sexy. Um, I think it's one of the last things that we think of as practice leaders. I think y'all get so burnt out on your dental board compliance and your OSHA compliance and your HIPAA compliance and your cybersecurity compliance and all the things that we get to lead a team and we're like, yeah, we'll just figure that out or DIY it or ask somebody in a Facebook group or it's not really that important, right? And then you end up with like a $142,000 fine from the IRS for misclassifying your employees. And you're like, oh, that was a thing. I should have known that. So that is what I get to do. And unfortunately, yeah, I sometimes work with the practice leaders that they either did not realize that they were supposed to know things or they weren't going to do anything about it until it became a problem. So I love to work with the ones who really value and see that, hey, dentistry is a team activity. And in order for me to be a practice leader, I have to actually, work with my team and I have to follow these guidelines and regulations. And not only that, I want to create a space that my team really wants to work and be able to reward and value the team members who work hard for me. And so those are my favorite people to work with. And then to answer your question, what I tend to work with them on is, first and foremost, of course, keeping them compliant. There are federal, state, county, and sometimes local laws, depending on where you're at, that it's just very overwhelming for a lot of practices. I currently have 60 some odd clients in about 23 states, including the ones you don't want to be in or the ones you don't want to do compliance in anywhere. And so I am very familiar with a lot of them. I have a lot of resources and databases that I can pull policies from and get background on whenever we have those questions. But just in general, I've been doing this for so long that my goodness, I at least know what I need to go look up or at least know, something off the top of my head. And so that's fun for me personally, getting to use that expertise and help keep practices compliant and help keep them out of trouble, help keep them from spending lots of money on fines because mistakes are very costly. I'm sure we've all made a few of those. The second thing I typically work with is going to be your policy development, doing things like employee handbooks. I know those are things that, like I said, I see a lot of people trying to DIY it. I see them trying to pull it from a friend's practice. Hey, post in a Facebook group. Does anybody have a handbook that I can start with? And it's like, oh, please don't do that. Because even if you happen to find another practice that's in your state, are they your head count? Do they have your particular practice situation? They may be in a different city, like I said. And because there are different thresholds with head counts, and sometimes even with revenue, depending on where you're at, that practice's policies may not apply to you. And if you either do one of two things, you undercommit yourself where you're not following the rules, or you overcommit yourself and you have implemented a policy that you really didn't need to, but now you've got to follow because you put it in your handbook. And then the last thing I really work with is total compensation. So how much you pay people. Are you paying market value? What does your bonus structure look like? What does your PTO look like? How are you competitive? How do we get those benefits out there and show potential candidates what it's like to work for your practice and what they're going to get when they come work for you and why they should want to work for you above anybody else? What makes you unique? And so those are the things I really, really enjoy working with, typically those three things. I do a few other things too. I do things like sexual harassment investigations and, then the fun stuff that gets all the great stories, but that nobody really wants to have to do. In some cases, I end up getting to be that person, which I probably could write a book, I think, at this point of employees behaving badly.
So I'm very curious as you're out at dental conferences, interacting with business owners, right? I'm sure that you hear stories, right? Stories of people saying, I wish I would have, right? And then there's regret, right? I wish I would have known about you. I wish I would have known that this was a thing. And now I have regret because this happened. I'd love for you to maybe share some of those stories of regret so that people understand the importance of how you help.
Absolutely. A lot of them is regret that they let somebody else control things. I have had practices. There was one of them, it was a 2-doctor practice with both wives working in the practice, both spouses working in the practice, and their office manager was the one managing their handbook. And they come to me because they have an employee separating and she gave a 2 weeks notice and she has several hundred hours of PTO accrued. And mind you, this is in Texas. This is not a state that requires you to allow indefinite rollovers or paying out unless your handbook says so. And theirs did because their office manager had made some changes to it and they were not aware. They didn't know that they should have had anybody else take a look at it. They just thought she knew what she was doing and they trusted her explicitly. And while it's great to have those team members that you can trust, you still want to have some level of oversight. And so the answer to their question, unfortunately, was yes, your policy says if you give a 2 weeks notice, you'll get all your PTO paid out and that there was no cap on rollover. So yeah, unfortunately, you were paying this person out several $1,000s worth of PTO. Um, I have situations like that. I have some of the fun ones, like I said, some of the sexual harassment or some of the other ones where they didn't realize that they should have had a certain policy in place, or they ended up terminating somebody for just general, hey, we're just going to let you go instead of the actual misconduct of what that was. And this person who has done something egregious comes back and actually wins their unemployment case because they didn't have their correct documentation in place, because they didn't give them an explicit reason for why they were letting them go. They just said, well, we're just going to say it's just not working out. It just is not a good fit. And I'm like, no, we have a handbook, you have policies. This is actual misconduct and we need to terminate it as such. So things like that, they're not comfortable with confrontation. They just don't want to say anything. And they wish they would have had somebody to kind of bounce those ideas off of and support them through that process, so that now they're paying out unemployment to somebody who really doesn't deserve it.
This is why I think HR is sexy, because let's be honest, like as a practice owner, as a doctor, as an office manager, this is not the information. Like the information is like, it's deep and it's wide and there's a lot of nuances. And so the last moment that we want to deal with HR is when we need to deal with HR. That's like the moment where we're like, we did this wrong. And so that's where I think if we can set these things up in a way that really is like preventative, proactive, like one, it builds a better culture in the practice. Two, for any hard question, which typically when it comes to your team, those are the hardest questions to answer. We have a protocol, we have a plan, we have a strategy. It's already in place. So you don't have to be the bad guy. You don't have to make it up on the fly. You don't have to think, wait, if I do this with the rest of my team members, is this going to work? And so that's why I think it just gives this like peace of mind, this structure, this ability to kind of refer to something that's greater and bigger than your own opinion in really critical moments. And so, like, proactively and preventatively with doctors that are listening to this, like, what are the bare bones that they really need to have in place to help them like do a great job? If they're like, wait a second, HR, I haven't even thought about this. What should they be thinking about to be proactive, to not have to call you and be like, oh my gosh, please help me?
Number one is going to be your employee handbook. And I know that sounds incredibly basic, but I'm just shocked at how many practices don't have it in place. They're using somebody else's. They're using one from 5 or 10 years ago. They're using one from the seller. I see that a lot because in transition, they tell you, oh, don't make any changes for the first 6 months. But you're using somebody else's policies. You don't know if they're compliant. They don't really fit what you want for your practice. You may have, wanted to change a few things, or maybe you need to change a few things. I had one a couple of years ago. It was actually an optometrist, and we were working on her handbook after she had bought the practice, because it was one of those situations that I hear all too often of, well, I bought a practice last week and I'm going to meet the team on Monday. And I'm like, so you've hired people you've never met. That sounds like that's going to end well for you. But I hear it all the time. And so we just then had started working on getting her handbook in place. And so she had been using the sellers. And she calls me one afternoon. She's like, we have a problem. Okay. She's like, my husband's here. That was going to be your office manager. We need to talk to you about something. I'm like, okay. Well, we had an employee come in today and her ponytail was on top of her head. And I'm like, yes. And well, the handbook says that the ponytail needs to be at the nape of the neck. And I'm like, are you asking me if we should discipline an employee whose ponytail is too high? Well, but that's what the handbook says. And I'm like, oh, Lord, no. The answer is no. We're not going to have that in your new handbook. And just no. But she was so very by the book based on a policy that she didn't even write, that she really felt married to this, to the point where she thought this was a serious issue. Also, no. So we'll have things like that, like I said, it's super, super basic sounding, but it is one of those things that quite literally gets everybody on the same page. Not only do you need to have one, you need to know what's in it. One of the ways that I work differently with clients with their handbook is I take a very consultative approach to it. I do not send out a template with a bunch of questions and then pop it into a draft and send it back to them for review and say, here's your handbook. We actually set up several meetings, about 60 to 90 minutes each, 2 to 3 meetings, where we go through section by section so that you understand your rights and responsibilities as an employer. And I have the opportunity to customize what fits your specific practice. And I feel like this is something that doesn't always happen whenever you work with an advisor, or if you're working with somebody like an attorney, they're charging you by the hour to do that. And so I really want to make sure that my clients feel comfortable with what's actually in their handbook because it's not helpful otherwise. I had one several years ago. It was actually a husband and wife that owned their own practices, and I had worked with the husband to develop his handbook. Well, his wife, who was a client of the CPA firm at the time, but not a client of mine for HR, had called me because she had lost her unemployment case and she was going to appeal. And she wanted my advice on it. I said, okay, send me what you send them. Send me your handbook so that I can take a look at the policies that you might have referenced in your documentation and see maybe why you lost this case. She sends me a list of like 9 different reasons why she fired this person, which first of all is a really bad idea. They want to see one good solid reason why this person was terminated, not all the things they've ever done. And then for 2, I opened the handbook to see, okay, is there something we can use in here? Would this have even been helpful? And I open it and I'm like, oh, yeah, this would have been helpful. This is mine. They had taken the handbook that I did with the husband's practice and put her information in it. But because we didn't have that consultation, we didn't go through it and customize it for her practice. She didn't realize that she had all of these policies she could have done documentation properly with. She could have had several write-ups and actually let this person go for a reason that was misconduct or a policy violation, because this person had done several things. But unfortunately, she lost the unemployment case and she lost the appeal because there wasn't anything to appeal. She did not take the proper steps to begin with. So even if you have one that is a great handbook, if you don't know what's in it, it doesn't help you.
So once a handbook is made, how often does it need to be revised, redone? What's that process?
Depends on your state. Most states are usually at least once a year, once or twice a year, you should take a look at it. If you're going to change benefits, you want to do an amendment. There are some states, California, Colorado, Illinois, that make changes more regularly at the state level. And so I have actually heard attorneys advise, at least for California, to take a look at it every month. I don't know if I'd quite go that extreme on it, but maybe quarterly at a minimum, because it does change a little bit quicker in that state. But then on the flip side, you have states like mine, which is Texas. We have session once every 2 years. So we do want to still take a look at it once a year because there may be things you've changed that aren't necessarily a state law dependent. Things like how you're structuring meal breaks or how you're structuring benefits, things you want to update and capture so that, again, everyone's on the same page. But you do want to occasionally review it, definitely more often than once every 5 years, or some of the ones that I'm seeing that haven't been updated since prior to COVID. Those are always fun.
I know that like the handbook can be like this thing that's like in like a dusty shelf in the back of your office and like this little corner cubby, but it needs to be more of like a present live document. People need to understand like what's inside of it. Each team member needs to really understand it. How do you recommend kind of like deploying the handbook to a practice? Like now that you have this great handbook, how does the team know about it?
Have a meeting with them. Have a meeting and go through it with them. Don't just hand it to them. And actually nowadays it's usually a digital drawer that it gets buried in. But if you're going to update a policy, you want to review that with them. I also like to recommend going through some of your policies at Huddle maybe once or twice a month and say, hey guys, we just want to review the cell phone policy this time. I want you to make sure that y'all are using your benefits properly. And so I just wanted to cover some of your benefits today. And, I want those front and center because these are things that we're providing for you as value to your employment here. And so we want to make sure you know and are getting the best use out of them. Things like that you just kind of touch on a regular basis, and it doesn't become a dusty thing that sits in a digital drawer at that point.
100%. And I will say, like, as an office manager, when I was operating as an office manager prior to our handbook, it was confusing and stressful. And then after the handbook, and it was like clarified, it was empowering and exciting. And it's true. Like, I think sometimes we can get scared of HR because, like, when we think about it, it's almost like we're dealing with problems, but it actually gets to be like a very powerful kind of backbone of your company that allows you to feel like really empowered in your approach. And when I started Clear Coaching, it was one of the first things I did was I had employees from 4 different countries. I was operating out of Bermuda. And so I needed support and I needed advice on like, how do I handle these things? And going through that process actually emboldened me and empowered me as a business owner to know how I was setting up the structure and the culture of my own company. And so I just want to like encourage anyone, like this gets to be actually really like kind of a fun experience when you're doing it proactively.
And I love seeing that transformation, especially for a newer practice leader. These are things they don't teach you in dental school, how to lead a team and how to manage processes and so on. I love seeing that transformation of a client who is like, okay, I'm really afraid to implement these policies because I'm afraid my team is going to hate me for them. So I'm just going to tell them that you said that we had to do this. And that way we're going to all just make sure that we're still following the rules, but it's your fault. I'm like, that is totally fine. I don't have to work with them on a day-to-day basis. There are no friends in HR. I'm cool with it. But then they get to a point when they're like, they can actually handle this confrontation. And then they call me after they've had the conversation with the team just to kind of follow up and be like, I want to make sure I did everything right. I'm like, yes, you did. You did. This is fantastic. You are exactly on track. I love seeing that transformation. It usually takes, a couple of years to get to that point for some. But it's always great whenever they do. They feel empowered because they've had something that they can implement and something they can hold people accountable for. And that makes them feel more confident as a leader. And then going forward, they're able to handle some of those things. I always tell my clients, I don't want you to have to want to work with me every single week for year in, year out. I want you to feel like you're capable of handling these issues. And then you come to me whenever there's, an off the wall problem, but that you can handle the day to day without feeling overwhelmed. That's an amazing feeling for them. And it's a good feeling for me too.
That's awesome. So I know that you do have a course in Dentalflix. I'd love for you to share a little bit about what everybody can learn. And then also, if doctors are like, you know what, I need to reach out to her, I need to get started with her, how can they reach out to you and what's the best way to reach out?
So my course on Dentalflix is the Management Myths course, Why You Shouldn't Get Your Dental HR Advice on Facebook. I presented it at Lynn Tao's event, the Supercharge Your Dental Practice event. And it is solely built on myths that I see and things that I see wrong in dental groups, office manager groups, dental groups in general. Some of the things like, oh, you don't have to pay your people for training as long as you say it's not mandatory. It's like, yeah, that's actually not what that law says. It's like an 85-year-old law that really shouldn't be up for debate, but let's talk about that. So I have some of those conversations of things that people are just consistently getting wrong, these myths that will not die for some reason. I don't have to pay people for training. I can just say that if they forgot to clock in, I'm not going to pay them for that time. Things like that's really not how this works. But those myths seem to persist in dental groups. And so, yes, that is my Dentalflix course. It's one of my favorite ones to present. I swear it's a little funny. Actually, it is for a compliance course. It is kind of funny. I get to talk about background checks and erotic literature. You'll have to go watch it if you want to know why. It is a lot of fun. For a compliance course anyway. If they want to reach out to me, and they're welcome to reach out, I give out my cell, honestly, 512-876-4866. And if you are an email person, Kara, Kara, @clinicalhr.com is the best way to reach me. I'm always happy to have a conversation.
Kara, I want to honor you for just the work that you do in our industry. I know how scary it is when there's something happening in a practice and we don't know the right answer. As an office manager, I've been there, and that's where your HR team member is a part of the integral part of your practice. And so you need to have a HR team member that you can trust, that you can work with. And I just love that you have brought this to our industry and that you support practices. I can imagine the amount of stress you take off of dentists' plates every single day and how you protect them from getting into trouble in ways that they don't even know. So I just think what you're doing is really important. And I love your personality. I love your humor. And I think anybody that gets to work with you is probably very privileged. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here. I love this podcast and I love what y'all are doing with Dentalflix. I think that's a great, great benefit to dentistry.
Thank you. I appreciate you. And I just want to honor you as well. It's been great getting to know more about what you do here on this particular podcast, which is great. Like, we love these podcasts. I've got my own coaching program, and I'm excited to connect you with the doctors that are in our program because this is a gap I know in a lot of their practices. And so I'm just grateful to have you as an added resource that I can use for the doctors that I have the honor to be able to coach. So thank you so much for sharing today, for being on. And guys, please reach out to her, have a look at her course inside of Dentalflix so that you can learn all of those things that maybe you're doing wrong. And again, just want to thank all of you for listening to Dentalflix Uncut. We love serving our dental community and helping you to get resources to grow your practice so that ultimately you can build a better business, take care of your patients as well as your team and your families. And we look forward to seeing you guys on the next episode of Dentalflix Uncut. Take care.
You've just unlocked valuable insights with Dentalflix Uncut, but there's more. Dentalflix is not just a podcast, it's a thriving community, a hub of knowledge, and the #1 online streaming CE platform in dentistry. With just a few clicks, you can start exploring a wealth of resources, including in-depth training on leadership, case acceptance, scheduling, hiring, weekly marketing calls, insightful gap assessments, and scorecards, all designed to help you master what you discovered today and propel you further on your path to dental excellence. Head to dentalflix.com to get started for free and embark on your journey towards mastery. Thanks for tuning in to Dentalflix Uncut. See you next time.